to take into account all those groups, and I was pleased with the amendments that Councillor Rowley was proposing to put forward, and I do support them, because I think it does take on board the extensive consultation that has taken place, and takes on board and builds on the evidence base which Rosemary Queen talked about earlier on. It is very important, as councillors, we've got to take into account the pressures that exist in the city, and ultimately we have to come to an objective judgment as to the way to move forward. And I think that the balanced recommendations that Councillor Rowley put forward are the right sort of route forward. The changes that are happening in the city are to a small geographic area, but of course it is an extremely busy geographic area. But it's one which we have to take into account what has been happening over the last 10 to 20 years. I think overall there are a number of other recommendations that we have before us as well, which again I welcome. I think the visitor parking scheme, which has not been touched on too much tonight, but it actually is something which throughout the city many people have wanted us to do something in this area. So I do welcome the recommendation that we have here, and obviously it's something that we hopefully we will build up on over time. Again, along with Councillor Connell, the comment about the second parking permit, it's one which I'm willing to support, but I think it's something that I would want convincing about the administrative sort of side as to how feasible it is to actually do. So I don't have a problem with the concept, but I think I'd like assurance that is something which can feasibly be introduced. But overall, I think at the end of a 15-month consultation exercise with extensive work from the parking task group that's been referred to earlier on, I think the revised recommendations are ones that are supportable and are in line with the evidence base that we received, and taking that into account with the overall sort of pressures, I think on balance that is the right way forward.
Thank you very much. Could I call Councillor Aiken, Cabinet Member for Children's Services and for Community Protection?
Thank you, Leader. It's with my community protection hat that I'd like to make an observation, and I am delighted that Councillor Roberts actually read my whip copy this week and noted that I was in Leicester Square on Friday evening with the Metropolitan Police on an operation related to the area. One observation I have to make to you this evening was the sheer amount of traffic in the area between the times of 8 and 12:30 when I was there, and the appalling parking, and I was quite astounded at the sheer unfortunate way people choose to park, which I thought led to a very chaotic atmosphere for pedestrians, which then led to what I thought was a feeling of unsafety for many people trying to cross the roads, which is a very busy area, as we know, and I think that anything that can help us manage the traffic, manage the parking. I have no problem with people coming in and parking, but they need to do it sensibly, and I think by introducing an experiment for 18 months to see if it works in the West End, to make sure that people are safe to travel and that there's no element of criminality that can be introduced by number of cars and people not being able to move around freely, then I welcome the experiment.
Yes. Thank you very much. Councillor Argyll's Cabinet Member for City Management.
Thank you, Leader. Like Councillor Connell and other colleagues around this table, we've of course all read and reflected on both the report and the considerable number of representations made, and are very clear about the strength of feeling expressed in a large number of those, which we've all of course considered very carefully. We've also had to consider alongside that our responsibility to balance those representations with the need to ensure that the city's traffic continues to be managed effectively and to flow smoothly. I would echo the comments made by Councillor Kaplan in respect of why this review and why now, which is that in a city such as Westminster, which is changing year by year, if not month by month, and the traffic within it and the challenges that poses within it are changing in that way, at over 10 years, a review of this sort is long overdue. The city has changed, and we must be willing to examine the evidence and those changes and see whether our management of traffic needs to change to reflect that. I believe that the evidence of that change and of that need is clear and robust within this report. I also believe that the evidence of consultation and a willingness to engage extensively, not just in terms of the representations we have in front of us this evening, but in terms of the number of emails, meetings, telephone calls that I know Councillor Rowley has engaged in personally with anyone who has requested to talk to him. And in terms of the extremely important work undertaken by the task group, on which members of all parties sat, and which was the recommendations were broadly accepted by all those members. In respect of the amendments tabled this evening, I recognise and welcome the amendments to agenda items 1 and 2. I think that reflects the willingness of Councillor Rowley and the willingness of colleagues around this table to listen, to heed what comes out of that consultation. It's been very clear in the work that officers have done, and I should pay tribute to the amount of work that they've done at this point, regardless of whether one agrees or disagrees with the recommendations. The amount of effort that officers have put into this in often challenging circumstances is clear and does deserve recognition. The challenge is there to balance the views of those who have been consulted and the needs of all of those using Westminster's roads, and I believe that these proposals seek to do that, particularly noting the amendments which I welcome. I would just pose, if I may, a couple of questions to the Cabinet Member for Parking, which perhaps he can address in his wrapping up. One is, I think, similar to that of Councillor Connell, which is, I would be interested to hear his observations on how that experimental nature of the traffic orders will work, and whether there will be the opportunity to consider representations made during that period and the evidence gathered. And I would also ask if, in respect of, I believe it's recommendation number 5, in respect of the community governance mechanism, whether he would be able to clarify, in the light of various comments that have been made, many of them inaccurate and misleading, about what that would actually mean, if he could just put on the record clearly exactly what that recommendation seeks to do. But overall, while I recognise it is always impossible to keep everyone happy, I believe it is important that these carefully considered recommendations and the evidence base behind them are pushed forward as recommended, with the amendment to recognise the way in which the city has changed over the past 10 years.
Thank you. I have Councillor Alistair Moss, who is the Chairman of the Major Planning Committee and Deputy Cabinet Member for the Built Environment.
Thank you, Leader. Being a lawyer, I couldn't help but go back to the statutory framework by which we are exercising these powers, and I was drawn to page 48 on the legal implications and the section of the 84 Act that we're being asked to consider. And it's informative there to read what that is our duty first to have regard to, and it is also in relation to the expeditious, convenient and safe movement of vehicular and other traffic. Well, that's fairly obvious, but no one this evening has really talked about why that's particularly important. And I think one thing that hit me in the face, that is the elephant in the room here, is the quality of life of all people that live and work and visit the city. And the clue is in section 122, where we're told that we can have regard to any matters appearing to us to be relevant. And one of those matters is national air quality. Now, we are on notice as the local authority that the quality of our air in the city is in some wards deteriorating people's quality of life by several years, that the level of particulates due to traffic flow, due to braking, due to people moving around and general congestion is such that we need to do something about it. And I've long said for years, and this is what I say publicly in the Air Quality Action Plan, that this is something that I think if we do not grip and are not seen to take seriously, generations to come will find us culpable for not dealing with. And that alone, to me, is reason enough to be making this decision. We have evidence here, overwhelming evidence, from experts in Buchanan and from the consultees that there is congestion at times where your lines need to be looked at. The recommendation in respect of double yellow lines, there are roads in the West End that are totally impassable at certain times of the day and night. And we also have evidence of the fact that the residence parking and paid-for parking times are not adequately controlled at the moment, and these, I believe, are a proportionate response to that. But an overriding additional matter here that I think we should have regard to is air quality, the free flow of traffic. It is something which we as a generation will not be forgiven for if we do not grip it, and that, to my mind, is a very good reason for doing this, alongside all of the other factors that have been mentioned by and it's not health and safety, this is about people's quality of life and how they live. It is not just about one interest group, it is about all people. We all breathe air, we all live, work and visit here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Moss. I would now like to call Rosemary McQueen to respond to the points that have been made on the report, particularly those points that have been made from a sort of professional point of view, which are suggesting the methodology is in some way flawed. And then I'll ask Councillor Rowley to sum up. In one of those sets of responses, could I ask my own question, which is about implementation? It would be unfortunate if people who don't live in the city were unaware that these changes were being made and made assumptions about the parking regulations which didn't prove to be true. It is quite difficult to know how to park well in the city, and it's quite important, therefore, that we give people adequate time to adapt to any new regulations we bring in. And I'd like that aired by one or other of you. Can I call Rosemary first?
Thank you, Councillor Marshall, for your comment saying that you felt that, following on from the amendments, that you were in support of the report as it stands. For Councillor Roberts, you made many points, and I'm only going to, in a sense, touch on ones that I think particularly need to be addressed straight away. You're worried about the fact that the Director of Transportation is not here. In fact, the City Commissioner for Transportation has been fully involved in the development of the paper, and indeed was on the phone to me about an hour before I came here from Switzerland at his own expense to make comments about further consultation responses that had come through. So he has been in part, in a sense, a conscious drafter of some of the recommendations, and also has been involved in the research methodology and also the work of the consultants. So his absence from here should not cause any particular angst. I think that either myself or my much better qualified colleague with me here, Hugh Brennan, could answer any detailed comments that might be in response to specific transportation points. You made the point in general terms that you thought that this could kill Soho. All change obviously must mean that people behave in different ways and have to adapt to the change. And what can't be written in a report, which is already in a sense far too fat to almost manage, is the professional background and expertise of colleagues who have spent their life dealing with transportation changes, which includes looking at the way changes have happened in other cities and towns of the UK. I mean, for one of those, the idea of introduction of park and ride was obviously one where many people said city centres such as Cambridge or Norwich were going to die because there was actually going to be restriction on parking. Indeed, that is not the case. In fact, what has been shown in many pieces of academic research is that those towns and cities have become qualitatively better places to invest, to visit and to recreate in. And indeed, the retail and the restaurants in those towns and cities, because of the quality that they are able to bring, have shown that it has actually, in a sense, revitalised some of those cities. But it will mean some changed behaviours, yes. You mentioned about how businesses are going to be serviced. I mean, that's actually contained within the report. One of the difficulties of the congestion within the city has meant that businesses have said they are finding it difficult for some of their service vehicles to get through. So by a combination of things like shared loading pads, being able to book loading pads, the fact that we're moving into freight consolidation, and the fact that in there you will also find in a recommendation a review of yellow, single and double lines in order to make sure that vehicles can move through. That is how we are going to ensure that businesses are being better serviced and more efficiently serviced than they are at the moment. In relation to this question that I think both Councillor de Moldenberg and yourself mentioned, which is this dip in parking numbers, again my expert colleagues will be able to give any more facts and figures that might be required, but it is worth just dwelling on it momentarily. The Zone E is the one that you're obviously talking about, which includes Soho. I would just stress that both for daytime and overnight parking between 2006 and 2011, parking has increased in those areas by 19% and 10%. The evening rate has reduced by 10%, but the evening rate has reduced for various reasons. And of course, it's not just the specific numerical numbers of parking that we are concerned with, because you actually have to look at the base. The base in 2006 was 83% parking saturation, 73% in 2011, that 10% change. Well, 73% is already over the stress limit that we have adopted with advice from our professional consultants, Buchanan. So we're actually talking about something which is starting from a high base, and that is why we're concerned about it. What we also have to take into account is a continued increase in demand for parking across central London that's going to be happening, because what we're talking about is policies that are going to take us through the next number of years, not just something for 1 or 2 months. Traffic level growth is going to increase, and we have to manage the curbside in a more effective manner. That is the reason why, notwithstanding just in that element, the 10% reduction, there is still a recommendation for parking controls to be brought in. With regard to the churches and particular services, yes, I can see we have recognised, and that's why we put in the response, that there are particular issues there, and it would mean some changed behaviour patterns. However, what we have found, is because we all had to change our behaviour patterns, we've all had to change because of various things that have happened in the way society is organised throughout our lives, and this is no different. I would say that encouraging people.
Why do we change now?
I would say that encouraging people to walk for short distances by parking elsewhere actually achieves other. It does achieve other health and well-being issues that we also have to look at. It is still possible for people to be dropped off outside the church, and for then the driver to park elsewhere. And it is also possible to look at opportunities for parking in off-street car parking, which have got capacity. Meetings have occurred between officers and the managers of these car parks. They are already offering and provide service, for example, for casino workers to have the opportunity to park off the street at preferential rates. And they have indicated that they are willing to explore options with other interest groups to do the same thing. In relation to Eric Pickles' comment today in relation to the high streets getting a boost from fairer parking, I would say, it's quite an interesting press release, but the actual text talks about the fact that councils should develop strategies that help their centres grow. And that is exactly what this parking policy is to do with, because it is not, the parking policies themselves are only one strand in terms of management of the spaces between buildings. We are also looking at other ways of using the streets. Little comment has been made by the fact that pedestrians are also people who are to be looked at in terms of movement through the city, and therefore they need safe places to walk, they need wider pavements, they need the opportunity to sit from time to time. Even the use of pavements in terms of play space is something that are alternative uses that need in due course to be looked at. So what Eric Pickles is saying is not, in a sense, running counter to what we're doing here. What he's saying is, locally, councils should be able to look towards the future economic regeneration of their area, which is obviously a central policy of the City Council, and then to make the best proposal. So you could say, I suppose, crudely, is it right for someone to be able to put themselves into a parking bay and stay there for almost the entire weekend without anybody else being able to access that bay? And what this would allow to do would be a cyclical movement of people moving in and out, and therefore being able to get to the shops as well. In relation to the overview of Camden businesses, the Camden proposal is just for a very small area of Camden, Chalk Farm, Camden Town North West. It's not been actually in operation long enough for the research to yield any benefits. Whether even the benefits of that very small area would be particularly relevant to the West End, I'm not sure that that would be the case, but nevertheless we have actually carried out the wishes of the task group and scrutiny. In relation to whether, when Crossrail is finished and other building operations that are undertaking in place of the road at the moment, we should wait for that. Well, we would be waiting till 2017, which would be rather a long time for us to kind of tie our hands and not make any responses to the parking stresses we see at the moment. In relation to some points that Councillor de Moldenberg has made, in relation to Westfield, I would just say that Westfield do actually charge for parking, just like the West End, and I would perhaps say that the hype that Westfield was going to drag a lot of the economy away from the West End, that is indeed not what has happened. Westfield, you know, I might say is almost a one-hit wonder. People have gone there to see it, just like they went to Blue Water. But in fact, the attractions of the West End, the complexity of the offer of the West End, the dwell time that is there, is something which has meant extraordinarily resilient figures and growth of figures for businesses right the way throughout the recession. Key retailers, key hoteliers, key restaurateurs have their location within Westminster because of the quality of the environment, which is one of the strands that we're trying to support throughout this. I think that's all I want to contribute at this moment, unless there is anything in relation to any of the technical matters that my colleague would wish to add to. No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rowley.
I will ask Rosemary one question before she concludes. My colleagues asked specific questions about experimental traffic orders, and I just wondered if one of you would mind just outlining in greater detail the process with regards to them.
I'm actually going to ask my colleague to deal with this. I could, but he will actually have greater depth.
The benefits of experimental traffic orders allow highway authorities to actually listen more to what people are requiring. It also enables a highway authority to make amendments to complex schemes on the street. It is also adequate that under the Road Traffic Regulation Act 1984 that we have introduced similar measures of this size before, and we do understand how to amend such schemes on residents' requests. A classic example of this recently is the shared use visitor parking scheme up in Maida Vale, where the the cabinet member of the time and also the director of transportation and parking at the time did walk with residents and make amendments to the scheme to the behest of residents' needs. So in summary, we believe that the experimental traffic order is a good mechanism of understanding local needs, yet at the same time enables the council to introduce such a scheme effectively.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Hugh. I'm very grateful to all of the colleagues for their comments on that. I'm also grateful to the many animated voices from the public gallery, which has also been helpful to recognise where things are particularly controversial. I want to address a few points from Councillor Roberts and Councillor de Moldenberg. I doubt you're surprised when I say this, but I'm very happy to have a discussion, and I respect certainly at least one of your respective positions with regards to these policies as being genuinely held and completely genuine in terms of how it's interpreted. But those arguments and those beliefs have to be based on accuracies, and I'm afraid there were certain inaccuracies in the assertions that were made. The concept that we are unfamiliar with the West End is something which I find difficult, having lived within the centre of London for a year myself, and also Councillor Roberts will probably be pleased. And also Councillor Roberts will probably be pleased to know that I fraternise the bars and the restaurants of the West End to a sufficient extent that I probably am unaware of what goes on there. I also find it difficult to accept the principle that we've undertaken too little consultation. I doubt there is a process and a project within the council over the 11 years or the 12 years which Councillor Roberts has been on this council for, where for this level of policy the amount of consultation has been undertaken as it has, and that is a direct result of the requests from elected members such as ourselves to ensure that the consultation was adequate and sufficient and to give people the opportunity to be able to comment. Councillor Roberts continually refers to the Director of Transportation and the absence of the Director of Transportation in this regard. I have told Councillor Roberts on numerous occasions he's not led by the Director of Transportation, it's led by the Strategic Director for the Built Environment, if I have her title correct, and I hope that's been made clear tonight. Councillor Roberts also made an assertion that when she went to a number of meetings in the centre of West End, that they voted to a man and a woman to not implement these changes, and I fully respect and accept her views and her recollections of those. I also went to a number of meetings which she was not present at, including the West End Area Forum, which councillors are invited to discuss issues. At that West End Area Forum, there was not that unanimity which Councillor Roberts indicated. Councillor Roberts also indicated there were no property owners in favour of these changes. That is incorrect. Grosvenor, Portman and the Crown Estate are in favour of those changes. Councillor Roberts also indicated there were no residents in favour of these changes. That is also incorrect. The Marylebone Association have indicated favourability in terms of some of the proposals which we are bringing forward. The Fitzrovia Neighbourhood Association have also brought forward support for the proposals which we have put forward. The chair of one of the Mayfair Residents Associations has put forward his own personal support for some of the proposals which I will restate that for the proposals which have been brought forward. A chair which I'm not sure could often be labelled as a Tory, Paul. The strategic director has outlined a number of points which I won't go over again. Councillor Roberts refers to table 3 on page 22, where she makes the assertion that in a certain zone there has been a decline in there is less people parked on a Sunday than on a weekday. The point is, if you aggregate all of those, there is actually an increase. And ultimately, that is what we are seeking to do here, because we're proposing to bring it in for a small area within the centre of London. Councillor Roberts also pointed to the odd way in which traffic flow was measured within regards to the automated traffic count. Throughout this process, there have been member oversight for all of the things which we have done. And if Councillor Roberts wanted to have made those comments clear, she could have joined the task group which Paul de Moldenberg joined, and which we met 7 separate occasions to talk about aspects of what the council was doing. We talked about Eric Pickles. Councillor Roberts also talks about the fact that we should be lining more, so I hope that she will welcome the particular aspect of this proposal which suggests that we should relook at what lines again. As I say, I completely respect Councillor Roberts' position, but I do think we have to have this discussion on the basis of accuracy. Where I can't probably respect the position of is my erstwhile colleague Councillor de Moldenberg, who has been all over the place on this issue. He was part of the task group which met in early May, which supported these proposals and stated they were logical and necessary necessary, and I find it
I did not support that.
And I watched Councillor de Molenberg nod his head when we talked about this. And I have an email here from Councillor Alan Bradley, who is the chairman of this port. I said, well, he's entitled to change his mind, but he hasn't stated he's changed his mind. He's been completely disingenuous with you.
Absolutely clear.
I see in the local papers that Paul de Molenberg is claiming that he did not see in advance the note to Cabinet conveying the views of the Parking Policy Task Group, which I chaired and of which he was a member. That is not true. He was sent the note on the 6th of May and Cabinet met on the 9th of May. Even before the 6th of May, he would have known what the note was going to say because he attended the meeting of the task group in April at which the proposals were considered. And he did not demur from any of the conclusions. At the end of the meeting, I specifically asked him if he wished to put in a minority report, and he said no. And I find it absolutely disgraceful, Paul. This is the second time that I have seen you come to Cabinet and let down people in the audience because you were trying to hijack a proposal.
Thrusting your way because you've lost the argument. You've lost the argument with everybody here, and you're now trying to smear me.
Yeah.
And it won't wash. Well done.
Paul, ultimately, the point remains that you supported these proposals a few months ago, and you no longer do. In terms of, Colin asked a number of comments about implementation. If these proposals are due to go forward, we will of course look to ensure that appropriate processes are put in place so that people are given information. We're looking at republishing, for example, the Park Right booklet in this regard, which gives people information about how to park in Westminster, and there will be a period of warning notices which ensure that people are not charged if they're parking incorrectly in Westminster, in order to show them that there is a change that's occurred. I think the point that Brian Ed made about experimental basis has been answered. Brian also raised the question about multiple parking permits, and I think that it's fair to say a number of colleagues have asked about the practicality of this issue, and in terms of proposal 4, it is suggested that this proposal needs further work, and I think that there will be a further report coming forward on it, and I think we will need to discuss some of those proposals and some of those potential issues with regards to that. Overall, at 10 to 9 on a Monday evening, having taken nearly 2 hours of the valuable time of all those who have chosen to come to see this, yes, but Paul, at least I'm consistent, Paul. In order to, where have we actually got to? Well, we understand and we recognise that there are incredibly strong views on these proposals, and and the strength of feeling and the depth of support or opposition which is in the audience tonight is an indication of that. We also recognise that there are groups who are in support of these proposals who perhaps haven't been as vocal, but also need to be considered in the wider gamut of things. After 15 months of long discussion, much consultation, many emails answered, many meetings, a lot of talk and views about taking into account what people made, changes to these policies tonight in recognition of some of the things that have been discussed. I think that the Council, in recognition that it does this once every 10 years to see what's actually happening on the streets of Westminster, to make sure that the policies that it puts in place are appropriate for the streets of Westminster. I think that it is important, and I'm glad we've had this discussion tonight. I would recommend the amended proposals to you, and I hope that you will adopt them for the best interests of Westminster.
Thank you very much. Could I make some final remarks? First of all, I don't think it's out of place to repeat my thanks that I've made at the start of the meeting to the officers, consultants, and the consultees for everything that has been contributed to this debate, including the observations made tonight, both formally and informally in this room. It has been an extensive consultation. I also pay tribute to Councillor Bradley, who led the task group that went into this in a considerable amount of more detail than we could over a series of meetings earlier on in the year. Many of these steps that are being recommended to us tonight have already been taken by our neighbours. in the face of arguably lesser pressures on them, and have those people still have vibrant economies with a civil society active and alive in them. And I don't think Westminster will be any different if we adopt them tonight. We have, as usual, the task of balancing the needs of residents who want to be able to park outside their front door, who want a vibrant economy right there where they've chosen to live, and who want to be able to use the city for all the purposes, including worship, that they come to live in the city for. And we owe that to them, and we are trying professionally and carefully to deliver that to them. We also have to respect the businesses and try and encourage the businesses that live in our city. And I don't think it's obvious that just because you introduce parking restrictions that you make it more difficult for people to come to businesses. Of course, it imposes a cost, but it also creates a turnover. And that means people will be able to come for a couple of hours and go and shop and do what they have to do and leave space for somebody else to come in their place. And that could very well lead to an improvement in the economy, as opposed to these places being taken up by people who park there for extended periods of time. So turnover is valuable and turnover is important. It works for the rest of the week, and it is necessary on the weekend and in the evening as well. I recognise and respect the religious communities who are represented here and who have responded in the consultation. I personally found it a matter of some regret that Sunday ceased to be special, but it has ceased to be as special. It has ceased to be as special as it was when I was growing up, and the city therefore needs to have the management of it as much on Sunday as it does in the rest of the week. And I have to observe that that there are religions and faiths that work and flourish despite the parking restrictions that occur on their chosen days of worship.
It's not in the West End.
And they do flourish in the West End, and therefore we have this sacred task, if I may put it that way, of balancing. It is a sacred of balancing of balancing every interest group. Every interest group that has come forward and offered their view. We recognise the validity of every view that has been expressed. But the task of striking the balance is ours, and therefore I will support these recommendations. I detect the cabinet members here will be supporting them as well. So I put the recommendations to the meeting, as amended by Councillor Rowley. All those in favour? Those recommendations are agreed.
Put your hands right up to the front. We couldn't see, Chair.
Item 5 has been withdrawn. I have not been notified of any other business under item 6, and therefore this meeting is concluded. Thank you very much for your attendance.
See a show of hands.
Yes, you are from Salvation Army. I love your posts, they're really useful. Really useful, thank you very much. No, we read them avidly.
Where?
Bear with me 1 second.